up on Big Giant Heads.
Whatever was driving him into the snowy darkness was fueled by sheer necessity, and now together, bonding over our mutual discomfort, it felt like we had forged our own group.
Fitting in by not fitting in is all about fitting into yourself, finding out what you like, what you don't like, and that takes a lot of time, but try something, do it your own way, forget about everybody else.
In this episode, we speak with Chris Ballew, formerly of the band Presidents of the United States of America, and now the lovable solo act, Caspar Babypants. But first, David has a story about getting comfortable with not fitting in and embracing the awkward moments that make you stand out.
All right, it's story time. I lay awake, staring out the window next to my bed. From the top bunk of our cold metal-framed bunk beds, I could almost see the edge of our compound. But with every gust of icy wind, I was reminded of the only deterrent we needed to stay inside. You'd think a window would be appreciated, but in these conditions, it was just a canvas of frozen condensation. And as I scratched at it, doodling otherworldly symbols, I couldn't help but imagine futuristic prison planet. Here, there'd be no need for towering walls, electric fences, or even guards. Home would be light years away, and in the rare moments when the clouds would break, you'd only see the two ominous moons that took turns blocking out the sun, perpetuating the endless twilight winter. You long for a familiar sky, fear you've lost count of the days. Most of the time you find yourself lost in thought, recounting the events that got you sent here. But then, suddenly, a pain jolts you back into reality. This isn't a punishment. You aren't a prisoner serving some intergalactic sentence. And sure, you might be dreaming of escape, but it wasn't from a futuristic prison planet. This was camping in the dead of winter in Canada. And if you didn't scrounge up the courage to venture outside soon, you were going to piss the bed. Hours had passed since I first felt the twinge of pain in my abdomen. After a long drive to the campsite, and with a full bladder, I arrived late and after everyone else had already settled in. Now in this dank and cramped cabin of 12 sleeping Cub Scouts, you couldn't make a move without causing the bed frames of our interconnected 3-level bunk beds to screech against each other. Plus, there wasn't even a bathroom, only an outhouse about 100 feet from the cabin. So I held it, thinking I might forget the pain in my sleep. But hours later, when I began clawing at the windows, imagining I was in a sci-fi prison, I knew I was going to have to deal with the problem. This whole trip was pitched to me as a way to get my camper's badge. I was new to the whole badge system, and though I didn't quite understand the appeal, I was also a little jealous that most of my local group had upwards of 10 badges adorning their uniform. In the early 90s, the Scouts' uniform in Ontario consisted of navy blue pants, a brown button-up shirt, a navy beret, and red sash. The sash was where everyone showed off their badges. Of the whole getup, I was most at odds with the sash and beret. The beret made the outfit feel like a military uniform, while the sash made me feel like I was in a pageant or parade. But I went with it because I was trying out the idea of fitting in as opposed to showing off all the time. Which is also why I was a little anxious about disturbing everyone just because I had to pee. As I carefully crawled down from my bunk, the bed creaked as I imagined, but strangely, no one seemed to notice. So with a little more confidence, I started to make my way around the maze of towering beds. And still, I only heard a few shuffling sleeping bags. My plan was to put on just enough clothes to duck outside the door and pee from the porch. But this plan wasn't just about minimizing my exposure to the elements. I also really didn't want to go near the outhouse. During the day, it looked like a coffin that had been dug up and propped up against a tree, and even then I wouldn't want to be caught dead in it, let alone expose my most vulnerable bits. Does an outhouse even work in freezing weather? I didn't want to know. And so the blizzard was a convenient excuse to help me avoid it completely. Finally, I was close enough to the coat area. But just as I started to put it on, a voice called out from the darkness. "Hey!" I froze, imagining I'd be invisible if I just kept totally silent. Then the voice spoke again. "Hey, what are you doing?" A kid was sitting up and looking straight at me. Invisible, I was not. I called back, "I have to pee." Then a different voice called, "Are you going to the outhouse?" "Well, no. I was just going to pee outside the door." Then another voice, "I'm going to come too." What was going on? Did everyone have to go to the bathroom? Now it sounded like half the room was crawling down from their bunks. The kids closest whispered to me, "I'm so glad you got up." "Yeah, me too." I didn't know what to say. I had just gone from who I thought was the most awkward kid in the room to the ringleader of a bathroom run. Sure, it was just a few steps outside, but it might as well be on a different planet after the mental acrobats I'd put myself through. The boy closest to the front door cracked it open. A floodlight outside lit the thick, dusty air of the cabin, exposing us all to the ridiculous sight of each other wearing only underwear with our winter coats. Everyone shuddered as a sharp gust of wind cycloned between our skinny, hairless legs. But still, we all followed through the mess of bags and snow pants that littered the floor from rummaging around in the dark. When I got outside, not surprisingly, everyone had peed in record time. There was just one kid standing away from the others. He had put on snow pants and was looking out into the darkness. And as I started to relieve myself, I squinted through the snow, trying to see what he was looking at. Then, over the howling wind, he asked a question he probably assumed was futile to ask someone already peeing in the freezing open air. "Can you come with me to the outhouse?" What was I supposed to say? I was still a little scared, but, not surprisingly, the feeling of emptying your bladder after 3 hours gives you a euphoric sense of courage. Still, I hid any apprehension by putting on my snow pants, for one extra layer of protection against whatever might be lurking around the frozen toilet coffin. Then we headed down the icy path towards what I imagined might be his final poop. Like my initial descent from bed, whatever was driving him into the snowy darkness was fueled by sheer necessity. He probably would have gone without me, but I could tell he appreciated my company, even though we didn't say more than our names. I thought I might have misheard it with all the wind. I hadn't heard a name like Tao before, so if something did happen, I hope I heard it right. "You say a boy named Tao was dragged off into the forest by a creature living in the outhouse?" But of course, we survived. There were no supernatural or even natural forest-dwelling creatures waiting for us. So except for a frozen ass, Tao was unscathed. I thought, you really can accomplish anything with an empty bladder. And now, Tao was feeling the same euphoric bliss after not only relieving himself, but having done so under even more extreme conditions than the rest of us. Back at the cabin, it was now 3 a.m., and a few of the kids hadn't gone back to sleep yet. They were quietly talking and invited us over. There was an ease to everyone's attitude now. What had earlier that evening felt like an uncomfortable and awkward living situation now felt cozy, like we were all in this together. The other kids introduced themselves, and in the process, confirmed my new friend's name was, in fact, Tao. We were both 9 years old and went to neighboring scout groups. And it turned out, we were all either from groups where only a few kids joined for this trip, or, like me, were relatively new to the whole Scouts program. And now together, bonding over our mutual discomfort, it felt like we had forged our own group. It made the rest of the trip bearable and made me feel like less of an outsider when I got home and returned to my regular group. A few months before the camping trip, I had gotten in trouble for climbing onto the school roof. This attention-seeking stunt made it abundantly clear I needed new ways to express myself. Scouts was to be where I'd learn these skills. Though, from the vibe at home, I couldn't help but feel like it might also be one step away from a much more serious approach, like boarding school or a padded room. Needless to say, I felt some urgency to learn these skills. So, from the first gathering, I took every opportunity I could to participate and fit in. But, oddly enough, it was my dad that made things a little more complicated in this respect. All the kids had to wear the official Scouts uniform, complete with sash and a silly hat, a navy beret. It was advised that the leaders and volunteer dads should also wear the uniform, but apparently it wasn't mandatory for them. So my dad didn't. He wasn't trying to make a point. At least not at first. I just think, like me, he thought it was a dorky outfit, and given the option, he chose not to look like a dork. I respected that. For the first few weeks, I overheard my dad casually mentioning he just forgot the uniform at home, which seemed like a sufficient enough excuse for the group leader. But by the third week, some of the kids started to ask me about it. Why won't your dad wear the uniform? Then the next week, I noticed my dad wearing just the beret. My dad brought your dad a spare. Turns out this kid was the group leader's son, and apparently me and my dad's uniform were a talking point in their household. And when I mentioned this to my dad, I could tell he found it as annoying as I did. So the following week, he brought back the spare beret. When the leader asked about it, my dad responded with the severe look I was all too familiar with. It's not for me, is that all right? Then he handed it back, and neither the leader nor his son mentioned it to us again. But I had a feeling the incident stirred up something in my dad. Meanwhile, I continued to try and fit in as our group began the annual fundraising campaign. That year, we were fundraising for the upcoming winter camping trip. I didn't like camping in the summer, so I was already indifferent about our goal. And when I realized we'd be offering apples in exchange for donations, any enthusiasm I had turned to skepticism. Especially because I knew about what my sister Sarah was selling with the Girl Guides. They sold these cookies that were so good I'd sneak a whole box into my room, finish it, and then immediately confess to minimize the amount of time I'd have to wait before I could have another cookie. And Girl Guides also had an amazing distribution system. They weren't hauling around baskets of heavy apples. They would have people pre-order, and then when the cookies were ready, someone's parents would drive the girls around to drop them off. And unlike apples, which literally grow on trees, you could only get these cookies from Girl Guides. We were stationed outside a grocery store. We were asking people to donate money for apples at a place where you could already get apples. Either somebody would be on their way to get groceries and not want to carry around a basket of 12 apples, or somebody would be coming out, having already bought apples as part of their groceries. So, at the end of the day, it was no wonder we'd only made $40 in donations, and most of those people didn't even want the apples. Maybe I'd have been a little less cynical if I'd known that months later, it would be me on the winter camping trip, and it would be these funds determining the quality of our accommodations. Instead, it was myself, Tao, and the rest of the Misfit cabin bonding over late-night bathroom breaks and the futility of fundraising with apples. The last Scouts event I ever attended was the Pinewood Derby, a tournament where everyone built and raced miniature wooden cars. My dad took a particular interest in the competition and took the lead for the building part. And as I watched, he told me about a TV show he liked when he was my age. Supercar was a BBC series centered around a futuristic flying car and was the inspiration for our car. Then he told me a little more about himself around that time. As a young kid from an immigrant family in Nottingham, England, he had a little bit of a hard time at school. He was a little hyper and, like me, felt like he didn't quite fit in. He didn't like his school uniform, often forgetting one piece or another, which also often resulted in corporal punishment at the hands of his headmaster. To me, it sounded like his school was a medieval dungeon, which he claimed wasn't too far off. A few weeks later, our Cub car won first place in the tournament. Everyone, including our group leader, celebrated our victory. Surprisingly, my dad even wore the Scouts uniform that night. Maybe it was the special occasion. Or maybe he thought, if anyone was going to talk about us, he wanted it to be about something worthwhile.
Your dad in that uniform, this reminds me a lot of you. I would imagine that you were probably very similar to your dad as a kid.
Yeah, he kind of gave me the impression of that when I was really young. I'm not sure how I felt about that, but I definitely feel like there were a lot of similarities. What about you and your parents?
Oh yeah, I'd say I'd take after my mom, and I'd also say my older sister. I think you even noticed that quite a bit when we were last in Australia, that there were some ways of handling maybe emotions from my mom. I think in my 20s, and I would always be like, oh, I don't want to become my mom, but like now it's, oh, I'm glad like I'm carrying some of those traits forward.
I think you're really critical of your parents.
Yeah,
at that age.
Yeah,
and
that's what I think. You're overly critical.
Yeah, and you're super insecure about yourself as well.
Yeah.
And you're looking for why you're this way, you know?
Yeah, and you want to avoid pitfalls, and I think definitely becoming a parent, and for those who aren't parents, just I think maybe getting a bit wiser as you go on in your life. I think you really understand that your parents were always growing during their being a parent to you. And that is great information to have, that like they haven't finished their journey. You never finish your journey. And if we have a few traits here and there that are the same as our parents, that's touching.
How did you fit in or not when you were a kid?
I would say I definitely tried to fit in. I was someone who always wanted to be in a group, and I think little things created bad circular loops for me, like little events where, I don't know, like I was calling a friend every day, and then she was like, call me less. And I took that as never call her again and never call anybody ever. So I took it to an extreme place. But it goes to show how maybe I think I'm one of these highly sensitive people where like I take things very personally. So I would also say school is a very limited, small group of people that may or may not live anywhere near you. And I think at school, your people might not be in school. And when I say your people, I literally mean friends that you can relate to. So like I used to love playing video games, and I loved Harry Potter, and it was when Harry Potter was not quite yet famous and video games were not a thing that girls did, and I went to an all-girls school. But then I go to university, and what do you know? Everyone plays video games and is like someone I can talk to and talk about nerdy stuff.
It sounded like you had a really shitty social group at school.
Well, I was probably a little emotionally stunted in terms of like how to talk to people and how to be a friend. So like it goes both ways.
How do you think you've changed since then?
The single word that springs to my mind is acceptance, not only of myself, which I feel like I came to last year, which is great, but acceptance of all the people along the way who maybe caused pain to me, and seeing them not as evil or bad, but realizing that it's a whole spectrum with millions of shades of gray. And you never know what someone else's story is, right? And that's the thing. They can act like a complete arsehole to you, and it's on them, but we still need to accept that maybe they were hurt so badly that I don't know about, and that's what makes them spring out. But maybe they just really need a hug.
We've talked about this a lot too, like the whole idea that most of the time it's not you.
Yeah.
I mean, into my 30s, I was still thinking that encounters that made me feel awkward or insecure were my fault.
Yeah.
I'm sure they still are, but not at the rate that I thought they were. Always try to take a step back when you feel that someone's being weird. They could just be needing a hug, like you said, or space. Even something as simple as saying on your first day, some people are mean.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't experience mean people until I went to school. I didn't even know they existed.
But also, who's to say, like, our daughter could be the mean one?
That's true. You're right. Well, let's get to the interview then. Chris has some great advice on being yourself and not being mean. Our guest for this episode is known for many musical accomplishments, including a recent Grammy nomination for creating amazing music for kids and adults alike. But many moons ago, he played with Beck before his own band went on to go 5 times platinum with singles like Peaches and Lump. The Presidents of the United States of America was one of the first albums I ever bought. And years later, he's just released a new album under his new name, Caspar Babypants, called Happy Heart. We're so excited to introduce Mr. Chris Ballew. You know what I watched recently, just to kind of catch up, was your show at Mount Rushmore.
Oh, yeah. I watched it too when Trump what was it? Was it 4th of July for Mount Rushmore? Yeah, when he did that, I did an Instagram post of a picture of my face and the Mount Rushmore people behind from that show and said like, no, the actual presidents are at Mount Rushmore.
Yeah. I want to start with something, the 3 strings, the 2 strings. All your guitars seem to have 2 or 3. So it's more than the preference because it feels like it helped carve out your style or your sound. So it seems like you've always had a knack for making things work your way, fitting in by not fitting in, or
I'm following some sort of little lantern on a path and it's just going and I'm just like fossily. I don't know. I feel like trying to be timeless with my decisions is more interesting to me than being trendy. Like right now I'm making this droney, trancy, heavy ambient music and I don't know exactly where it's going to end up or if I'm going to make a record or whatever, but I'm just doing it. I think fitting in by not fitting in is all about fitting into yourself, finding out what you like, what you don't like. And that takes a lot of time. It can take decades of experimentation, but the idea is to like try something, do it your own way, forget about everybody else, start a huge, foolish project, as Rumi the Sufi likes to say, the poet that I love, do something weird and then see how you feel. Do you feel good about it? No, I don't feel that good about it. Okay, boop, move on. Do I feel good about it? Yeah. Okay, keep following. And if you keep on making these like check-ins and yes, no decisions, like yes, it feels good. No, it doesn't. Eventually you'll end up in an all yes place or something I like to call the yes-destination.
Yes-destination. All right.
I love that.
Because everybody out there wants to be near somebody who is manipulating that pure existence and joy. They can tell that you're doing that. They want to come around, gather around.
I was gonna say, I always felt like the Presidents was a little more lighthearted and innocent than the other bands around that time. Did you ever feel a little removed from the general angsty vibe of the other grunge alternative bands at the time?
The other bands didn't have a problem with us. I think they saw us as like a little brother or something. But believe it or not, I had angst and I had darkness. And I lived in Boston right before Seattle in the early 90s. And I had a terrible time in Boston. And I wrote some very dark stuff. So I think that there is actually a little bit of darkness in the Presidents. I look at it like there's pure innocence, which I think Caspar Babypants is. And then there's an extra element in the Presidents of like, grown-up angst or innuendo or sexuality. Mm-hmm. And so it's the innocence and sexuality and grown-upness, like the friction of those two made the Presidents. That's the spark that makes that work. So it wasn't like flipping a switch between pure darkness to pure light. I think we were more of like a fader, fading back towards joy.
Yeah.
How did your parents make you feel about your creative interests? Like, did they champion them or?
They both championed my creativity in different ways. My mom really overtly. I mean, she started me on piano lessons when I was 4. I took piano lessons for 10 years from 4 to 14. And I was sort of maybe being groomed to be a concert pianist, but I couldn't get into following the rules, like learning theory and how to read music and stuff like that. I just wanted to play all the black keys and just like space out. But she bought me my first 4-track when I had no money when I was in high school. And she set me up, man. She lent me money when I needed it to get through my 20s. My dad was a little more stoic and a little more like traditional. He was a banker. He grew up a sharecropping farmer's son in the 20s and 30s in Missouri, joined the Army, joined the Navy, actually, moved to the Northwest, met my mom on a blind date. Started working at a bank as a teller, ended up becoming the executive vice president of that bank. But he wasn't like emoting as much as my mom about keeping me on the path of creativity. But one day I was working on something on piano and I could not get this one chord to work. And I just kept trying and trying and trying and trying. I was actually trying to play the theme song for a show called The Munsters. I'm trying it. I'm failing. And slam down my hand on the piano. I scream out like, that's it. I quit. I'm just not doing music. I quit. And then my dad appeared in the doorway and was like, come here, took me into his office or whatever. And just sort of leaned over and was like, you are really good. You're really talented. And you really need to go back in there and figure out that chord and keep going. It's that kind of like thing. And I did. And I figured out the chord and I kept going.
Did you pass that type of attitude on to your kids?
Well, yeah, the main thing I'm trying to pass along to them is to follow their gut instincts and not inhabit a role in your life. don't use the script that you're handed. Write your own script and do that again by experimenting and checking in and knowing yourself. And so I just promote self-awareness, experimentation, and reaction to gut instincts. And even if the route seems very circuitous and weird, my 20s were a complete spaghetti route of weirdness. And I try to teach by example with my kids, I guess. I am living the life I hope they can live, and more show, not tell, but
Yep.
Have they shared any thoughts about your success back then and your success now?
no, they don't talk. They don't talk about it much. They do occasionally tell stories where like they're getting to know somebody and the topic of what do your parents do comes up. And like, I think Josie's told me a couple of times, like she's said who I am and how she's related to me. And everyone's like, that you're that guy's daughter. They've been steeped in it their whole life. So they're pretty nonchalant about it.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You've always been Caspar. The music of the Presidents had that innocence to it. I've heard you say that when you realized this was the fit, you were like, oh, that's what I've been doing this whole time.
For me, again, is like fitting into the sort of metaphorical suit that I put on to go out and interact with people. Ram Dass is somebody I'm really into these days, and he has this really great way of talking about existence. He's like, you're born and you're given this suit, this space suit, so you can live on this spaceship that's going through space. And so you have this spacesuit, and everybody tells you how beautiful your spacesuit is. It's a great suit. What a great suit, And you start to think that you are the suit. And as you grow up and you keep looking for that confirmation through like school and what you do with other people and then your job and your career, you get the mistaken idea that you are the suit when you really aren't. You really are just a spark of electricity that's making this suit go. And so I've always felt this urge to kind of lose the suit and just be the spark. And in that way, kind of make music that's transparently representing my real self, not the suit.
Yeah.
And I even felt like I didn't know these concepts, this idea of a suit metaphor, but I do remember thinking in the Presidents, like, this suit doesn't fit. It's like, it's too tight. It's not me. It's not, like it's very successful suit. And everyone's saying, look at your beautiful suit. And I'm like, hey, yeah, thanks. But it's not, it's binding. So I don't know, there's this lifelong urge to go clear in between who I really am, how I really vibrate just as an energy source, and the music that energy source makes. And being purely innocent and childlike is part of being enlightened and feeling that joy of acknowledging the difference between your real self and the suit you're wearing. Or as my Instagram quote, which I did not write, but I love, says, you're a ghost driving a meat-covered skeleton made of stardust. Relax.
What's something you're looking forward to that's not here now? That's
enlightenment and meditation for all. Like I'm looking forward to people, regular people who have been denied a safe upbringing and a good education, acquiring the ability to imagine their reality and someone else's reality at the same time and use that to be empathetic. I'm hoping that the people who we think of as lost right now will somehow be brought around. The other day I was daydreaming. I was thinking, is it possible to have an environmentalist fascist? What if somebody got into power who was a fascist, but a fascist for good? Like everybody is going to meditate 20 minutes a day. We are going to stop using all plastic, just like hammer down, like petroleum corporations are going to be dismantled.
I'm pretty sure North Korea has music plays throughout the city every morning, and you must exercise every morning. I may be crazy. Kim Jong-un.
I'm not saying like if you can't exercise, you'll be shot. I'm just saying. Anyway, that's something I'm looking forward to, like more people waking up and discovering that they have a gear in their gearbox, which is called like deep neutral, and that they can unplug from their own ego as an option for 20 minutes a day and replenish. I like watching those press conferences the Beatles would do when they got back from hanging out with the Maharaji, and they're being asked like, what's it all about? And the questions are very aggressive because they're like, what are you suggesting, that we all just lay around all day and we don't do anything? And the Beatles don't quite have it. They're kind of articulating like, no, it's really just an option. But I always fantasize about me popping up there at the press conference and being like, guys, let me take this. So like, no. You can all still go around, like being yourselves, doing your jobs, whatever. We're just talking about 20 minutes a day where you access another way of singing.
The new album is Happy Hearts. Caspar Babypants, Chris Ballew, former presidents of the United States. You can catch his music on Spotify, iTunes, all the platforms. You can also catch all of his stuff on babypantsmusic.com, where you can catch the mini jukebox, backstories for all his songs, and get in contact for when you're back touring or performing. Thank you again so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
I can vividly remember being on a school bus listening to President's debut album, and it's one of those things where sometimes your memories are so vivid from a certain time, and when you have a related memory later in life, you feel like you could just bridge them because they're so strong.
Yeah.
So yeah, great. Thanks so much for Chris. Really appreciate it. Caspar Babypants, everyone check him out.
Yeah, we've been dancing around with our daughter to a few of his singles. That's it. Episode 4 in the bag.
Big Giant Heads is written, produced, and hosted by me, David Fasulo. Megan Orr is my invaluable co-host and sounding board and mother to our baby, the space baby, and co-conspirator for these episodes. The intro and all music in this episode is composed by my brother, Matthew Fasulo. So if you're looking for a composer or a music producer of any kind, check out his work at mattfasulo.com. If you enjoyed the show, check us out on Patreon or consider following us on Twitter or Instagram. Search for Big Giant Heads on both platforms, or grab the links through our website. Visit biggiantheadspodcast.com for all questions, comments, or inquiries.
Thanks for listening.